Joining us is a man who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to political scientist Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath. Pleasant good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, yes, indeed. Good. I knew you were out, but welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. A lot has happened since we last talked, the U.S. elections, and looking at the results still, it seems as though the Republicans have grabbed the presidency, the Senate, as well as the House, and as well as the swing states. And looking at it, you said that you believe that the outcome of the recent United States election will not influence when Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley calls the next general election in TNT. And that has been a conversation. People have been asking, is there certain things that need to be put in place that you believe that needs to be tied down and needs to be wrapped up before that bell is rung?
Well, several things. In the first instance, I don't think that the government has debated the Elections and Boundaries Commission report. So that has to be debated in the Parliament. At least it has to be accepted by the Parliament. I mean, it's how should I put it? It's normal that it will just be accepted. But the point about it is still has to be debated. Right? It was tabled, but it has not been reached the debate stage. So that could happen at any point in time. The other thing that we know for a fact that the PNM has already started screening. By the beginning of December, it should have completed the majority of its screening. I think there are only about 5 constituencies would have been left to be screened after that, including the Prime Minister, as well as Mr. Young and the 2 Tobago seats. So those are the seats that are to be screened in December or January, as the case might be. But while that is one issue, there's the other burning issue that remains as to whether or not Prime Minister Rowley would want to lead the PNM into the next general election, or whether he would, because if he leads them and they should win, then he will automatically become Prime Minister. As to whether or not he is willing to put himself through that election again and to take the party to government should the party win. And that in itself would presents a lot of issues as to whether or not the party has dealt with that succession issue. We could jump high, we could jump low, we could try to hide as much as we want. We know that the PNM, the base of the PNM is the Afro-Trinidadian community, and there is a black caucus within the PNM, within the upper echelons of the PNM, which would want to see a person of Afro-Trinidadian descent lead that party, as to whether or not, and that I think will be one of the critical issues as to how the PNM readies itself for the next election, as to whether or not we would see a change in the leadership, and if so, who will it be? Whether the party will allow for the rank and file members to vote for a new leader. Those are the issues, and the whole succession issue within the PNM has to be dealt with. And whether they're going to simply delay it, which they attempted to do when they postponed the convention this year and delaying the election of the new executive, or whether they would want to continue. Now, bear in mind 2 things. When they postponed the convention, which would have allowed for the election of the new executive for the PNM, save and except for the political leader, the chairman, and one other position. But save and except for let's just go with the political leader and the chairman of the party. The fact remains that the screening committee of the party would be made up of other senior members of the leadership of the party. And had we had that election, some people who were screened earlier may very well have complained that the new executive were not the ones who were selected or so on. So in a way, those are some of the critical issues that the PNM has to deal with from its own internal mechanisms as we move into preparing ourselves for a general election.
Now, of course, waiting for some of the policies that Mr. Trump has laid out, I think there's at least two that this administration may want to be keeping an eye on, and that is, of course, the mass deportations of undocumented migrants. He did make it quite clear, President-elect Trump, that it is expected to be the biggest mass deportation of undocumented migrants in U.S. history. As far the logistics, of course, many are weighing in and saying that still has to be worked out, and there may be legal backlash, as well as the sweeping tax cuts and the new tariffs of at least 10% or more on most foreign goods to cut the trade deficit, and of course the energy sector. We have to look at that because he's made it quite clear, drill, drill, drill. He has said that on the campaign trail. He said that, of course, even becoming president-elect. These are things I believe that this administration may be looking at first before making any move.
Well, these are things that, whether or not they let's put it like this. Regardless of what Mr. Trump does with the United States, the fact of the matter is simply that the government will have to call an election by the first week in September. They don't have any more time beyond that. Okay? Previously, we were saying that they had 3 months after August 28th, but logistically, that is impossible again. So it has to be held by at latest the middle of September. Okay? Having said that, regardless of what Mr. Trump does in terms of mass deportations or tariffs or energy, well, the energy thing I think is really most important, and in fact the latest announcements coming from Mr. Trump's party today presents even much more of a challenge for us. When he appointed Rubio as the new Secretary of State, and we know his position has always been anti-Maduro, anti-Chavez Venezuela, and that is going to create some significant challenges if we are going to be dependent upon drug and field gas and so on. But be that as it may, regardless of what happens, the election has to be called. So, and like you said, in terms of the mass deportations, while he may sign an executive order on the first day of taking office, the logistics of putting that into place and picking up those people and deporting them becomes something that will be stretched out over a period of time. So that is not necessarily something that will impact in the short term the Trinidad and Tobago, and that is why I am saying that will not impact and affect the election date that the Prime Minister may very well decide. What may be of concern too would be the fact that yes, he is going to impose tariffs and increase tariffs in terms of trade, but Trinidad and Tobago has suffered from that. In the past, we know, for instance, that probably around 2015, 2014, 2015, we were charged with dumping of our steel because the steel company was getting reduced prices from for what they paid for in terms of natural gas, and to that extent they were charged with dumping, and they had to face severe restrictions in the United States. So we have had our experiences with that. But again, a lot of those things, while they are important for us in the medium to longer term, in the short term, which is what we're looking at as in terms of planning for an election, I think that those things will not necessarily bear fruit immediately and so as to affect when the Prime Minister decides to call an election.
And of course, there's still those issues. You said, of course, to assess the performance of the economy. There's still the economy. There's still crime. Those are major issues. If something doesn't take place quickly, isn't it that he's going to simply have himself politically cornered?
Well, the thing about it is that I think the two biggest challenges for them now would be the economy and the crime situation. They have not been able to arrest the crime situation, and I think that is going to be something that they had promised since 2015, and then used all the other excuses in the book as to why they have not been able to do so. With regards to the economy, I think that will be the biggest challenge for the government right now in terms of when to call the election. I mean, my reports are the government is close to being broke. If that is true, then a lot of the things that they would have promised to roll out in the budget for this year, the programs and so on, they may not necessarily be able to do so. And that in itself, I think, their inability to roll out some of those projects and programs would be the thing that might drive them to call an election sooner rather than later. So we could have an election as early as the middle of January, or going into from mid-January to mid-February. Or if not, we probably have it in April, May, before the midterm budget review comes along. Those are the kinds of concerns that will really affect the government in terms of choosing an election date. The whole forex situation is another issue that builds on that economic challenge, and we really have to wait and see how and what the government does, if it's going to do anything. For those of us who are of age, we would know that, for instance, in the 1980s and 1990s, we were limited to a certain amount of US dollars for travel allowance for the year. And every time you got that from the bank, they would stamp your passport and you can't get any more. So whether we go back to those days, we don't know. But clearly, that is going to be a significant issue for the government. I mean, the government tells us that they are planning to increase flights into Trinidad and Tobago, and that is all well and good. But every flight that comes into Trinidad and Tobago expects a flight to go back out with some degree of capacity. And if people can't get money to buy plane tickets and pay for their expenses abroad, then they will simply not have the option of going. Then what will happen to a lot of those flights? So those are the kinds of concerns the government has to grapple with in determining how fast they call an election. Bearing in mind that calling an election is one thing. What happens if they win and the situation worsens? Then what would be their agenda in terms of, because if once they're going to call an election, they're going to present us with a manifesto, we're going to do this, that, and the other. And if we don't have the money, then where do we go from there? So those are the real issues that will be developed as we move into 2025.
And one has to ask as well, do you believe that there's going to be any sort of fallout of what took place with the Auditor General, Jawanti Ramdas, where the Privy Council dismissed the Finance Minister's appeal, allowing Ms. Ramdas to continue judicial review proceedings in the High Court? Is there going to be any political fallout, or is it going to be more of a social fallout?
It's more of a social fallout. I mean, you realize immediately Colin Burt has gone silent on that issue. The Attorney General has not mentioned it at all. So the government has taken the position that, yes, they have lost the matter in the Privy Council. They have to go back to the courts. Well, we'll go back to the courts, and the courts, I mean, we know how our courts work. It's a long, drawn-out procedure. I mean, this matter may not actually be fully ventilated until after the election.
So it's a matter of buying time, perhaps.
It's just a matter of buying time.
All right. We also heard, of course, outgoing MP for Naprima, Rodney Charles, who made it quite clear that he's not going to put himself up for another election. He's making his exit. And he has made claims that there's no transparency in the UNC screening for general election candidates. And of course, Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, who is the political leader, made it quite clear that that rejection, where he made claims, which is Charles, that she's more interested in preserving her position as UNC leader than in good governance. What are we seeing playing out here? I mean, are there individuals who are simply not going to go silent into the night? They basically are going to stand and whatever political acts that needs to be grind, they are going to be there. And what role are they going to play as far as giving some disturbance in the elections?
Okay, I mean, that's a complex issue there. Are they going to stay silent? No, I don't expect them to stay silent. As to whether they have the wherewithal and the capacity to engage a significant portion of the membership of the UNC to listen to them and to follow them, I think not. They do not have that capacity. And that is where yes, there are a few followers who will listen to them and who will use that. And of course, the PNM will use it to their advantage to say there's this level of disharmony within the UNC and so on. But the point about it, I think Ms. Kamala Bissessa now, there's absolutely no doubt that she and her executive are going to lead the party into the election, save and except for health and other challenges that may become personal. But for all intents and purposes, I think the leadership issue within the UNC is something that we have gone beyond, as opposed to the leadership issue within the PNM because of the statements which Dr. Rowley had made. So the UNC doesn't have a leadership crisis. They still do have a succession crisis in that nobody knows who will come after Mrs. Prasad Bissessa. But the point about it, as to saying that there is a crisis in leadership, as at this point in time, that does not exist. As to Mr. Charles talking about the lack of transparency and so on, just to some extent, yes, I mean, even for observers like myself who are observing the political scenario, I find it a little bit disturbing that the UNC has not gone headlong into screening of candidates because, I mean, like I said, an election could be held as early as the middle of January. And if that is the case, then will the UNC be prepared to contest that election? And will their candidates have enough time on the ground to whip up support? I don't know, but I mean, and it is baffling to me as a political scientist that people are, or at least the UNC has taken this lackadaisical approach towards screening and preparing their candidates on the ground. But that is their business. I mean, I can't tell them how to run their business. But at the same point in time, I could say that I do not think that Mr. Charles is going to be able to win any significant support to again challenge or question what the UNC does. He has already indicated he's not in the race. He is not going to be contesting. And as we would have seen, I think if not, I think it's tomorrow. I think there's a meeting in the Shipwater's constituency.
Yes.
And Dinesh Rambali is not listed as one of the speakers. In fact, somebody brought that to my attention today. So clearly the UNC has already decided that they are moving on and ahead without, if I may use the term, the 5 dissidents that were rejected by the membership at the last internal elections. So the UNC is going to move ahead now. Mr. Charles, again, because their support base might be so small, they cannot whip up support. But mind you, they make the statements they make will have repercussions across the wider society and not amongst the membership of the UNC. As to how much people will take them on, that's a whole different question.
Yeah, that's right. Also on the issue, do you think that they have made up their minds on any sort of alliance, forming an alliance, or where do you still see perhaps there's a chance with the NTA, do you believe that those doors are closed?
I think the door to the NTA is closed at this point in time. The NTA has said publicly that it is talking to Hope and the COP, I think it was. So they have decided that they are not even bothered with an alliance. In terms of the Philip Alexander, I think has openly said that he is in full support of Kamala Prasad. So if there is to be any kind of alliance there, that might be the only alliance that we may see, or the accommodation that we may see as we go into the general election. But I think the door has closed on the NTA. Mind you, in politics, a day is as long as a lifetime. So anything could happen, anything could play between now and the elections. But the point about it, I don't think Gary Griffith has made, has allowed, or, well, maybe I should put it differently. I think Gary Griffith has, in a way, closed the door on the alliance rather than leave it ajar so that he could probably get back in at some point in time. His attacks on Kamala Prasad has not helped his cause and will not help his cause as he moves forward.
All right. And finally, I mean, looking at the entire landscape, those swing voters that we hear so much about, those deciding factors of people who normally would not vote for either party, do you believe that there's enough that has been done that these swing voters will be gravitating to the UNC based on the current social climate?
I don't think the swing voters would be gravitating to the UNC, and I should also say that I don't necessarily think that they'll be gravitating towards the PNM. So that is where I think that they would probably remain undecided and sitting on the fence, not gravitating to any one side or the other. Because the thing about it is that the PNM, and this is the real challenge for the PNM. I think the PNM's policies and programs, while seemingly supporting its base, is not necessarily helping its base, in that its base is feeling more and more marginalized and alienated. I mean, we talk about the issue with poverty, cost of living, all of those things, and people are so. The biggest challenge for the PNM now is to try to make sure that they get their own base to continue to support them as we get into the election. Now, as we get into the election, there's always the notion that when the election bell is rung, people will fall in line and support. But if in the same way, if I may draw a parallel to what happened in the United States, people in the U.S. weren't too much concerned about Trump being a madman, or Trump foreign policy, or Trump wanted to deport him. Well, I mean, yes, the deport was important, but they were concerned about bread and butter issues. Yes, if he deports, we'll have more jobs. Yes, if he raises tariffs, we'll have more jobs because we have to produce to sell to our own people. And so those are the bread and butter issues. When you come to Trinidad debate, when you talk about the cost of living and all the issues, for instance, and particularly so now, as we get closer and closer into the Christmas season, foreign exchange has become now gold, if not platinum, for some people. And the point about it is simply that the small business people who cannot access foreign exchange to buy raw materials or buy goods to sell back in Trinidad and in the distribution, they will be affected. They will pay at black market prices. They will then raise their prices. Who will then suffer? The masses will then have suffer because the masses will now have to pay the higher prices. And to that extent, bread and butter issues and your pockets will now become a critical point. And if the government is not doing anything, if people are seeing that the government is not doing anything to help with the cost of living and the prices of food stuff and everything else, then what is the encouragement to go out there and vote? Yes, they will go to the party, and I always say that there's a difference between going to a campaign party and FED and line and going out there and vote on election day, and you have to see whether or not policies will be put in place to encourage people to go out there and vote.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out as usual. Very enlightening. And we look at the landscape as things start to evolve and we get closer to that period where people would have to make their decision and go out there and make that difference. Again, thank you so much. Keep up the good work, and we'll speak to you again sometime in the near future.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much.